So let's begin with some basics.
Yeah.
So I think folks know who you are, but to give them some insights in your background, tell us a little bit about what you've done in your past and what's led you to now being the CEO of Uncharted.
Sure, yes. Well, first, thank you for having me. I think most of you guys know that things are a little rough in the United States right now, so we appreciate the opportunity to come to London.
Yes,
No, I like to often say that I've lived almost like a life of unlikelies, because yes, I'm very proud to say that I currently run an award-winning infrastructure technology company that develops different technologies, in particular for public administrators and governments that don't have the resources, don't have the capacity to build the infrastructure that their people need. But I never thought of myself as anything more than, well, I guess, to be honest, I like to imagine myself as like the love child of Bill Nye the Science Guy and Beyonce in almost everything that I do. But you can't get a degree in Bill Nye Beyonce. I tried. And they said, that's nonsense, Jessica. So I studied psychology and economics, and I Googled my way to every patent that I have. I grew up as a dual citizen of Nigeria and the United States, and I think what was really fortunate for me was my parents very much gave me the opportunity to see the world not just as it is, but as it could be.
Love that.
And to feel like perhaps there was something I could do to bridge that gap.
Yeah.
And so I started my career at the age of 19 with an invention called the socket. An energy generating soccer ball that could harness the kinetic energy or the energy of motion from play and store that power inside of the soccer ball. And
we had this on display.
Yes, so
out in San
I should say, I thought that I got called here, just so you guys know the tea, because the company that gave us the CAD software to develop this for free, thank you, was Autodesk. And so that was, gosh,
part of our foundation.
15 years ago or so. Right. So I was like, it was such an amazing and humbling and exciting call to get, because I very much believe that design is a lifestyle. I think that innovation is hope, but innovation is also a fight. Yeah. And for me, I've always been fighting for something. And even with the socket, the idea was, how many times can I go to Nigeria, be in the village, be even in Lagos with all my family in the bustling city, and notice that some things just don't make sense. Notice that, in the best of times, we're losing power during, someone's wedding, maybe during some event, and the worst of times, we're losing lives. And for me, at the age of 17, I think, I had just come back from Nigeria. I was finishing up my senior year of high school, and I lost 3 members of my family all in 1 year.
Oh, my goodness.
It was my grandfather, my aunt, who was younger than I am now, and my uncle, all from things that I knew could have at least been delayed, if not totally avoided, if they had access to the infrastructure that we often can take for granted. And it wasn't because there was a socioeconomic issue. In fact, people are often paying more per kilowatt hour in the global south than they are in a lot of places than you might imagine.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I think I grew up wanting to minimize the number of times I would see my mother bawling.
Okay, well, talk about being inspired.
And I think from there, what started with the soccer ball got me to this point of where I am now.
Well, what an amazing launch pad that you had. and as well, I recall that, because we talked a lot about that innovation, because we focused it on the fact that the kids were able to use it as a recreational activity, but then it charged the battery that served as a reading light in the evening, and they could charge up their phones. I mean, really a great way of bringing multiple different things together.
Well, and it's funny, the core concept there was amplifying existing behavior. Our most exciting technology now that we make as a company that's now being leveraged, by the federal government in the United States is basically a Google for government. And the idea is that the thing that tends to drive the most inefficiency when you're developing infrastructure is usually a data problem. the average person working in government, if they're doing their job the right way, is spending about half their time tracking down, correcting, collecting, or sharing information in different silos. And it's what makes projects cost 5 times as much as they should. It's what makes a project take 10 months or 10 years instead of a couple of weeks. And all of the things that were out there, all of the solutions that were out there required you to essentially be a data scientist to use, required some amount of training, which doesn't work for local government. If you train someone to be a data scientist, they will not work for government for very long. And so we said, well, we need to amplify existing behavior. We need to create a data tool that takes into account how they already live their lives. How do they already make decisions?
Right.
They use Google. And so even though it's not a soccer ball, in some ways it is. That kind of tenet of design and radical simplicity, radical inclusivity has followed me throughout my entire career.
All right, so I'm going to use that as a branch to something that I wanted to talk about with you. I talk a lot about mindsets and the importance of having a positive mindset to be able to achieve your most challenging goals. When you and I talked last, you talked about developing a design and make mindset.
Yeah.
And that stuck out to me because that talked about a framework, a way you're thinking about things to design and make and innovate on things that weren't there. So tell us a little bit about what is a design and make mindset and how have you applied it to create some of these great innovations?
You know, I think at the core, not to be trite, because I think people often like to say, well, this is a lifestyle and this is a lifestyle. But at the core, you need to see this, I think, the concept of design and make, not just as something that you do when you sit down at your desk in front of your computer, but your approach to your entire life. And so I mentioned earlier, you know, this idea of seeing the world not just as it is, but as it could be, believing that you could make the difference, that you can bridge that gap. That belief and where you carry that belief is at the core of a design and make mindset. And so, you know, I think for me, I've seen it in a few different ways. Oftentimes when people ask me, who's your favorite inventor? I'll say my mom. My mom does not have a single patent. She does not have a single patent.
You don't have to have a patent to be an
But
inventor.
you don't have to have a patent. But if you put a problem in front of her, and mind you, because my dad's going to get a little pissed about this, my dad is a PhD computer scientist, and again, he's a wonderful man. If for some odd reason he sees his dad, you are a wonderful man. It's not a competition, please. But my mom is my favorite inventor because her approach to life in the moment is, I will do whatever I can to create the world that I want. I will work with what I have to build something that gets me from where I am to where I need to be.
Yeah.
And so, you know, whether it was helping us out with class projects or the way that she very much was the silent leader of our household in ensuring that we had what we need even when times were tough. I just remember, I think even us getting some sort of furniture and it didn't come with the directions. And she was like, who needs directions? I don't even look at directions when I'm assembling furniture. And even to this day, I'm like, what a badass. Like, what a badass. And so for me, it now goes into everything. I will walk into a bar and I won't just be limited by the cocktails they're saying. I'll go to an event and I'll say, well, do you have this? You have this? Okay, stand by. This is what I want you to make. And then go ahead, you can call it the Jessica. So it can be as minute as that, but I think just, you'd be surprised if you kind of reflect to yourself how frequently when you enter a situation, you assume that everything is set forever. You assume that nothing can change. Yep. You assume that whatever is being offered to you is simply all that there could be. And yes, it can be as simple and as playful as, well, I want this drink or I want this to eat, but I think from a more macro perspective in the world that we are living in right now, it's now more important than ever to recognize the power of design and make in everything. Despite how bleak things feel, I still personally believe that there is an opportunity for every single person to make a difference and to change something.
So as a leader, it's great that you have that focus and that mindset. We have leaders here in the room. How do you get others in the organization to not settle for what they see as this is all we can be and get them to develop that mindset?
For me, I mentioned earlier that I think what I love about innovation is that it is hope. Innovation is hope. Like if you believe that you can create something that doesn't exist or change things, it will build hope.
Yep.
But to that end, you will get nowhere if you don't then just recognize that innovation is as much hope as it is a fight. And for me, again, talking about mindset, I actually go to people who often are like, I'm a pacifist. What do you mean? I'm an artist. And I'm like, no, you're a fighter. And of course they push back. They're like, what? I don't believe in these. I'm like, you're a fighter. And as soon as you embrace that and let that empower you, you'd be surprised, regardless of the person that in that organization where they're coming from. You have to then start to think about, well, what is it that's going to make you fight? And the first thing, to be very pragmatic, is just how personal you find the problem at hand to be. And so oftentimes what I'll like to do with my team is say, hey, this is the mission of the organization, or this is the mission of this project, but let's make it personal. And I mean, let's get very, very specific. So for example, there was a smart city project we were working on where we were advising a municipality on like smart city kiosks, those kind of monoliths that you see and the screens. And so I went through the same process. I sat down and I said, okay, well, what's going to make this really matter to me? And I thought about how I have a younger brother who's actually turning, 33 on the 29th. He made me order him a bunch of candy. He has severe autism. He lives with my parents. He will always need support. He will, when he's not living with my parents, he will be living with me, and I've always known that in my life. He's a 6'2" black man walking around the streets of New York, but he's a teddy bear. He's the sweetest, softest kid who isn't fully verbal. And I often have nightmares wondering what will happen if he ever leaves the house or gets lost somewhere and someone sees him and projects fear on him, when in fact he is the softest, sweetest, buy me all the candy, yes, I'm 33, but buy me all the candy guy in the world. And then I think about, though, how comfortable he is with his phone, with his iPad, and how comfortable he would be with that kiosk if he ever got lost in that city. And how he could use that kiosk to figure out where he is and to get to safety in a way that he could not do through verbal communication. I sit there and I go through that process and I make that project so incredibly personal that now when I'm sitting across from the client, I'm not just fighting for them. I'm not just fighting for the invoice. I'm fighting for my brother. And so I drink my own Kool-Aid in that way, and I let my team see that, and I ask them to do the same thing.
That's very inspirational. You make it very personal.
Yes.
But that's inspiring, and that's passion that comes out at that point.
Yeah, I think I recognize that we've lived in a world for some time where people said, in order for everything to be incredibly calm and coordinated at work, leave your personal self at home and just focus in on the work. And I guess I get that. Listen, I purposely have led a smaller organization with modular teams because I did not want that to be our situation. I wanted to know each person. I wanted to understand what they were fighting for. But I personally believe that there's incredible strength in that vulnerability. I also believe that the crux of innovation lives at the nexus point of everything that you are. Yep. And so when you leave parts of yourself at home, when you feel like you don't have a safe space to bring this kind of perspective into work, you're going to get just a shade of what your innovation could be. And at least at Uncharted, we just don't believe that that's something that we can afford.
I love that. I love that. So first, just to let you all know, from a process perspective, I am going to save some time for you to ask some questions. And when we get to that point, they're actually going to flash up a code, and you can scan it, and you can send the questions. But I have a few more, and then we'll open it up for your questions as well. All right, so I'm going to go back to Socket, because Socket is a really amazing invention, innovation. But you took it and you went to the next level and the next level after that. So how did you bridge from Socket, a energy harnessing soccer ball, to something like off-grid renewable energy solutions?
I think for me, because I always knew my true north, I was more married to the mission than to any specific solution that my company developed. And so it gave me space to evolve and grow. When I was 19 years old, I articulated the problem of inequitable energy access to be one of people like my cousins in Nigeria not having the confidence in themselves or the belief that despite being trained engineers, that they could do anything about their problem. And so in articulating the problem to be, they need to be inspired to believe in themselves. That's what beget then the solution of an energy generating soccer ball that would take that confidence and passion that they have on the pitch when they were, again, to be very clear, average to below average at playing soccer and yet incredibly delusional about their abilities. I'm like, how do we capture that delusion and bring it to the real world? I think from there, once we started to scale several thousand units of that, while people were excited, I was always very careful to not confuse excitement with solution, to not confuse intention with impact. And that's something I always go back to. And so while it was exciting, if the core issue was equitable infrastructure so that members of my family would be having shorter lives than they need to, I could see that excitement wasn't necessarily getting things to exactly where it needed to be. People, yes, were inspired, but things weren't unfolding at the pace I thought they needed to unfold. And so we would listen to our customers and keep building. And so it went from energy generating soccer balls and jump ropes and play products to working on a few solutions for a few Fortune 100 companies in the embedded energy space. And we actually made the shift to infrastructure in 2016. I don't even know if this is the audience for I'm just going to say the truth because we're here. Why not? Why not? And you guys can edit it. You can edit this out, right? The nervous laugh is like, can we? So in 2016, we made the jump to infrastructure and making energy generating infrastructure products at that time. Honestly, we always knew that there was an opportunity to do that, but we very much kind of put ourselves in certain lanes. Very few people look like me in the energy infrastructure space. I assumed that you needed a certain type of background to actually create infrastructure. We were afraid to do it. We had ideas, but we were afraid. And it wasn't until the election in 2016 in the United States when Donald Trump won that we decided, I'm not going to curse because I can see now if I could curse. But we decided, why the F not? What are we waiting for? And the idea really was, in my opinion, I found that at that time that Donald Trump was the most inspirational president that we had ever had. When Barack Obama was elected, many people asked me, wow, our first black president, aren't you inspired? Don't you believe now that you could be president, Jessica? And I remember saying, no, he's a constitutional scholar. This still seems like a very difficult job. I don't believe that he can be I don't believe I can be president just because he's president. But when Donald Trump won.
All right, did you expect this connection here?
I'm not going to lie. That moment when someone asked me, do you believe you could be president? I said, yes, I do. Would you need training? No, just throw me in there. Throw me in there, coach. I'll figure it out.
You figure it out.
And I remember walking into, my young millennial team. I don't even know what I would have done if it was just full of Gen Zers, but office probably would have been burning before I got in. And they were all crying and I'm like, team, this is the best thing that could have happened to us. We had been sitting here with ideas, but afraid to actually step into infrastructure because we don't think that we're qualified. We don't think we have the right experience. But look at this guy over here with no experience at all.
And he could be president.
And he's president now. If he can do it, if he can just wildly jump in, why can't we? We're sitting here believing that we're not the best people to do something when we need to start asking ourselves, but are we the worst? And so I kid you not, that day we started developing infrastructure level designs. And 3 months later, at the top of 2017, we changed our name from Uncharted Play to Uncharted Power. And we developed our first energy generating speed bump, which eventually produced 5 times as much energy as the leading energy generating speed bump coming out of Virginia Tech.
Wow.
So
Wow.
thanks, Donald Trump.
There's a reference that I've never expected to have.
Yeah. And each time I tell that story, like, he's not helping me tell that story.
Yeah,
it's getting
no.
crazier and crazier.
Yeah. So we went a little bit. I think what you've developed at Uncharted is really interesting, really cool, and it's part of a bigger smart city initiative. And smart cities are one of the hot topics. So can you give everyone just a little bit more of a what is it exactly that you developed, and how is it actually making cities smarter?
Sure. So the easiest tool that we have, so from energy generating speed bumps, we started to develop a lot more in the built environment, different tools that you can use to put smart city sensors and different IoT, that's the Internet of Things, IoT devices in the ground, and finding ways to reduce the cost and time of actually doing that. So pretty much all we've really spent the last half decade doing is developing technologies that make it cheaper and faster for the average city to be a smart city. And so that started with pavers that allow you to put things in the ground without having to rip it up and smash up the ground each time and save money there. But the most scalable solution that we have right now is really on the data side. And so before you can say you're a smart city, you need to have your data working for you. I don't want to get too technical, but there's really two reasons why your data won't be working for you. One is the different technologies that you want to install in your city. They don't speak to each other. It's called a lack of data interoperability, but let's just call it a language disconnect. And then you have also the different stakeholders. They've siloed their data as well. So everyone's just kind of apart. So what our technology does is it brings all of that data together. It gets them to speak to each other. And then it organizes itself in a much more friendly way so that a non-data person can play with it.
Got it. So you're making data accessible and extensible. And by the way, the way you just described infrastructure, I bet you many in this room say, those data silos exist in my companies or in my industries as well. So those are challenges that everybody is facing.
100%. I think the biggest difference that we saw was that, in businesses, there's a financial incentive to address it. In government, people are afraid of technologies that could prove them to be inept. So the big thing for us was similar again to the socket, recognizing that soccer was the most popular sport in the world and saying, how can we package this idea of thinking about things differently in something that's so playful that it empowers you, it doesn't scare you. A lot of our work is spent thinking about, okay, this community, this majority Black, brown community, this community that only has so much money, this community where people feel like the world is moving light speed, around them. How do we make something that makes you feel empowered versus feel like I'm afraid? And so, one thing now that's been very exciting is looking at some very specific things that you can do when you have your data organized. So for example, one community we're working in, because their data was incredibly just split up, siloed, for the last decade, they had failed to get any federal appropriations, any federal money, because you can't really apply for a grant with any success if you don't have your data organized. It's kind of like trying to write a paper before Google, but not wanting to go to the library or just the library is too far away. Within 1 year of working with us, they were able to secure millions of dollars in grants without expanding their team, just because we finally were able to help them build their own Google, and they were able to use it to start getting grants. And so
that's really cool.
Simple things like that are also what makes a city a smart city. Do you know your city well enough to see the problems that you have, dream of the world that you want, and then actually execute that?
I love that. All right, so the way you responded to that actually triggered a different thought. Because you're talking about data, we're talking about hot topics. So one of the hot topics today is generative AI, or artificial intelligence in general. And I know there's a lot of folks in this room that have been playing around with ChatGPT and thinking about what are the implications to my business with generative AI moving so fast. So what's your take on AI, and how do you see it impacting how we work?
How much time do we have? Okay, so let's take it very pragmatically. For most people, I think you should be incredibly excited about AI, about generative AI in particular. AI has been around. That's really important. Generative AI is in, I talked about data interoperability. I talked about language. All generative AI is, someone taught let's keep it super simple. Someone taught your computer how to talk to you.
Your model.
That's it. That's really what it comes down to. on the day-to-day, I'm a big fan of tools like ChatGPT for cross-checking your work. And so what I tell my team is, if our client can type in this question into ChatGPT and get the answer, that's now their BATNA. So whatever you're going to do needs to be better than that. And if you're not better than ChatGPT, you might need to just pivot in your career. Like, that's how I think. Because to be honest, like, so I think it's a good starting point, and I think it's a good way for everyone to have a baseline and understanding how they should be upping their game for their clients. I think that it will drive efficiencies, which is, I think, very exciting. I do not believe it's going to remove the number of jobs and not replace them with new jobs. So, for example, prompt engineer is now a huge job. The English major who thought they would never get into coding, look at that. Look at that. Incredibly, how many different ways can you ask this question?
Right.
So I think those are the exciting opportunities as well, and we need to approach them in that way. For us, our ability to provide this Google for government, to empower these communities with tools that they can use to answer the questions that they need throughout the infrastructure development process so that they can develop infrastructure faster and cheaper and better than before. At the crux of that is AI. So we feel good about it because, and this might sound a little bit, naive, but because we are good people developing models with a good mindset to help people do things that, honestly, if it was not for this technology, they would be screwed. Like, I believe that the most real way to make magic real is through science and through technology. And there are simply way too many communities that have been left behind because they could not pay the largest consulting companies in the world hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars to answer questions that now with our platform, they can answer themselves within seconds. And so I see that there's a massive opportunity there. I do recognize that there's a fear of, well, what if they take over and what could this be? And AI seems to be getting too powerful. I've said this before and I'll say it again. You should not be afraid of AI. You should be afraid of the people who are building it. And if you are particularly afraid, you should be someone who figures out how to build it yourself as well. And that's all I can say. And so we are one of the good guys building it, and we'll see where everything lands.
I love that. So I'm going to bridge off of that, because in the State of Design and Make report, 90% of the respondents that participated mentioned that reskilling their employee base was a critical success factor for them as the world is changing and evolving. So in the concept of AI, as you were just talking about it, how should companies be thinking about reskilling or retooling their employee base so that things like AI turn into an opportunity as opposed to a threat?
Well, so I think that there's two ways to think about this. One, let's go back to this idea of design and make mindset. Because if it's not generative AI, it'll be something else. Like the metaverse went in and out. We don't know where things are going. There will always be something new. So the first step is, how do you ensure that your employees, your team, are ready for whatever's next? How do you build this idea of innovation during times of uncertainty, innovation during times of change, and perhaps even chaos? And I actually think that is the more important thing. For us, I like to organize my team around 3 pillars of reflection: intersectionality, intention, and impact. And so intersectionality goes back to this idea of making it personal. The more that you know who you are and what you're willing to fight for and your true north, the easier it is for you to adjust in the midst of change because you're anchored by that.
Yes.
And then recognizing that you need to now align your activities to your true north is what intention is, and actually reflecting and saying, this is my goal, but am I actually doing the things each day to get me there? And then impact is all about anti-ego. A lot of times when you get funding, you get money, everyone's excited, you want your plan to work, and you will find ways to not be honest with yourself that it's not working. Yeah. And for me, that even happened with the energy generating speed bumps. It was incredibly exciting. A lot of municipalities were getting excited, but we couldn't get beyond a couple of demo pilot projects.
Okay.
And we had to have the honest conversation of saying, why isn't this scaling? We could keep pushing this and sure, make a couple of million, but we're not going to have the impact that we want. And that's when led us to having that massive discovery toward during the pandemic that led to our data solutions that we have right now that are scaling in really exciting ways. And so I think with that mindset, with that framework, ChatGPT comes in. We're not afraid. We're not, because it's not shaking our true north.
Right.
It can be adopted or adjusted into our day-to-day activities to help us towards that true north. It's not something that makes us reconsider the impact. So I think it allows us then as an organization to simply see these things as tools, to see these things as normal shifts in the way that the world works,
Yes.
and just move with that. It's the same reason why I think, while it may seem different to some, the pandemic, in and of itself, it was scary.
Yep.
A lot of unknowns, very different, but we actually ended I think 2021 in a significantly better situation than we had been in the entire history of the company because of that framework. And so there will always be something new. So I would recommend not training your staff for one specific new thing that came out. Otherwise, they'll always be in training. But to make them shift in the way that they approach new things happening all of the time. Yep. And then they should, with that mindset, be able to Google on their own and figure out how to use ChatGPT. Right. If not, that's a different challenge. It's a separate issue.
Yeah. Different challenge. All right, I'm gonna have one more question. Maybe we can have the Bloomberg folks put up the code so people can scan and start getting questions in. And while they're starting to do that, they actually that was very, very quick. Okay, so we'll start with one of your questions. So when you think about your process for designing and making, is there something more that you need from the technology that you use?
No. I think that for me, the process of design and make starts with something that's very much low tech, because it should be as natural as possible. Mm-hmm. It's usually a pad of paper and a pen or a pencil or a whiteboard. And then you start to shift it to things where you can manipulate it a bit more. In CAD and things like that, if you're designing something that's physical. So, for me, I think that when people say, I would have thought of this if I had this tool, that in and of itself is actually suggested that they're not in the most innovative place they need to be. Entrepreneurship, I define it as problem solving without regard for resource. Okay. So I'm going to work with the resources I have, and I'm going to build from there. And if I need more resources, then I'm being less of an entrepreneur or intrapreneur than I need to be in that moment.
And I think this is an interesting question. There's a different way of also looking at the question. As you and the team have been innovating, and you're clearly not without great ideas and things, are there any limitations that you've seen? Has a team said, if we had help in this area, we could do this much more?
It's very hard to say that to a black woman. So I'm trying to think about, and I'm just honest, because if my team, I'd be like, I'm sorry, you need what now? Okay. To do what? No, like I know. Perhaps is that? Do you guys want me to say something? Yes, we need more stuff. What do you guys want me to say? Is there an answer?
No, your answer is the answer.
No, because again, at the end of the day, one, we have so many quotes. So when we're a fully remote team now, and I have a poster behind me that says, everybody wants to be Beyonce, but no one wants to put in the work. So you have to think about the framing of this, right? And it's just like, Beyonce wanted technologies and tools when she was prepping for Coachella in 2018. Yeah. But she didn't get it. Right. And then my team will literally be like, this is true, Jessica. And then they just think like Beyonce. Yeah. So, I think at the end of the day, innovation lives between a rock and a hard place. So we have somehow internalized that when there are obstacles, that it's training us to do amazing, great things. It's giving us empathy for those who don't have. And the more that we can lean into that, the better we create. There are, I won't say their names, but there are Fortune 25 consulting companies right now that are competing for the same federal contracts that we are.
Yeah, okay.
And, and they're having team meetings about, hey, everyone, we have to shift into an age of resiliency now because all this growth was bad. Mm-hmm. We didn't have those conversations because we were just existing as a company that had to be resilient because we already don't look like everyone else. We already know that we're operating with less. And so how do we make that our competitive advantage, in particular in the way that we innovate?
Yeah, and your mindset too. I mean, I can see why you focused on the mindset before. It's a competitive advantage.
I think so.
That's awesome. All right, there's another question. Let's see. How do you prevent yourself, your team, or others from being overwhelmed by the size of a problem or opportunity, and what helps you with that challenge?
That's a very good question, especially right now with the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill. There are trillions of dollars going out to communities for infrastructure development, and we are one of the companies that the federal government is tapping to support that, which I can't say too much more, but it's a bigger, I often am now saying words that I didn't know existed 5 years ago. And it's the kind of deal that you really have to, even for me, meditate and lean into and actually breathe and say, okay, what does this all mean?
Right.
I think that one, from an experience perspective, some of these bigger projects 5 years ago would have held us in our tracks a bit more, whereas now, because of the things we've been through, because of the rooms that we've been sitting in, we recognize that a big project, a big opportunity is just several hundred small projects that need to be executed the right way. And so I think that that's what's very helpful. We've seen enough that we know, okay, well, that's wonderful, but what needs to get done today? What needs to get done tomorrow? What needs to get done in this next month?
Right.
And so we try to live with a little bit more temporally in that. And kind of always adjust in that way. So I think that really helps. I would also say that sometimes just keeping the team small. So we work oftentimes with dozens of people, but we try to keep any working team to I think it's called like the one pizza rule.
We're familiar.
We tried to keep, which I've learned.
Term, right?
Yes. So Jeff Wilkie is one of my mentors and an investor.
Okay.
And he's one of those people who first started advising me just after the pandemic for about a year, and was like, I like you. And I was like, if you like me, give me money. And then
there you go.
He likes me.
Good.
He likes me. No, but he's very big on that. And I think that when you create that, you also then create a safe space for people to be vulnerable with each other and share where they're nervous about certain things.
Yes.
And that then it kind of just breeds this humanity into anything that you're doing. Because at the end of the day, every massive opportunity is just a series of 100 or so projects that have to be driven by normal people. The same person that has to go home and make sure their kids have food, or has to wake up and drag themselves to the gym before they come in. And I don't know, in a weird way, nothing that big is actually that big. And I think that levity has helped us.
Yeah, I love that. I've talked in the past about when an outcome you're looking for seems so far beyond where you are today, that to target that as your goal is beyond what anyone can comprehend. So you take these baby steps along the way, and each time you achieve that one project, you get more confidence to be able to do the next project, and then more confidence to do the next project. Before you know it, you're halfway to a goal that at one point in time seemed unattainable. So it sounds like you've had great success in kind of having the team think about it that way.
Oh yeah, I mean, one thing I used to love to tell the team was just focus on winning the hour. And it's if you really think too big, I think the best way to think big is to think small, and understand these different pieces and these different mileposts. And for me, I love bringing things back to sports in some way. So growing up, I ran track, but I was a sprinter. And my best race was the 400 meter, but my favorite race was the 200 meter. I enjoyed the 100 meter until you get to a certain point and all the Jamaicans start coming in, and it's just not as fun anymore. I'm a Nigerian. You feed us some pounded yam, and I can run for a whole lap. But the second lap, I don't feel like it. Didn't you see me run it the first time? That's kind of our energy. And so everything for me was kind of like, okay, how do I sprints. I love the idea of a sprint. When I started to lean more into product development, I'm like, yes, let's wrap our heads around every 2 weeks. What are we trying to do? And you'd be surprised how much you can get done by focusing the team just on the next 2 weeks over and over and over again. And the number of times that you won't change your plan because you remained, to a certain extent, short-sighted. Yes. When I started boxing a bit more, I've been boxing now for about 2 to 3 days a week for the last 9 years. I first started boxing because I had created with my company an energy-generating jump rope, but I didn't know how to jump rope. Now I can jump rope in heels, but that's not what this event is about.
That would be impressive, though.
It's fun. It's fun. But I think what I love about boxing is that it doesn't matter how good of a punch you've just thrown, you can still get knocked out.
Yeah.
When you, again, going back to this fighter mindset and recognizing that sometimes you just have to figure out how do you get to the end of the round, how do you take pride in the win, but recognize that at any moment things could fall and kind of move accordingly. I think that also helps. If you're out here thinking about the 12th round and you're in round 3,
right.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think that's been very, very helpful. I have this 5'4" trainer named Jennifer Lopez, which is funny, but she's not the Jennifer Lopez. And when I'm 5'10" without the heels, when she punches me in the mouth and I fall, first I think about my key person insurance and I think about, didn't put this down. But then I'm just like, I'm going to take this into work today. I'm going to tell the team, hey, this person almost knocked me out. And so I think those are the things that help us in the day-to-day.
I love that. I love that. All right, there's another question that I think ties to something you said earlier. So the way it was asked, I'm going to turn it a little bit. So because you're actually doing this for your customers, how does data make it possible to design and make more sustainably? It sounds like it's a problem you're solving for customers every day.
Yes, 100%. So I forget his name, but there was a British philosopher who said, data is the new oil. We've all heard the quote. Mm-hmm. The problem is that most people see that and say, yes, data is so valuable like oil. But when he said it, I think it was a British mathematician, he said, no, I mean that just like oil, if you do not refine data, it will be worthless. Yep. And so I think that living in this world where we have so much data, all of the data we need to make better decisions, to do more, and the first step of design and make is to make a decision on what you want to design and make, right? To kind of create and explore with some sort of guidance. And so, the first thing that we recognize in going in, and especially working with different local governments now, with some of the work with the federal government, we've expanded to working also with citizens as well, because they're getting money from the infrastructure bill, as well as some local nonprofits and school districts, pretty much anyone building infrastructure. But at the core, there are certain decisions that you want to make, but you just don't know. Right. So, for example, based on your data profile as a community, as a government, it should be relatively easy for you to know what funding you qualify for from the federal government. But right now, if you don't have your data organized, you don't know yourself, you usually have to pay about $20,000 for that. Wow. Which is not cost effective for a lot of small communities, let alone for individuals. And then even when you look at all of the data that you have in terms of your infrastructure, if you had that organized, pulled together, synthesized, fused in the right way, there might be 30 different sustainability projects that you could do, but based on your data, there would be maybe 2 to 3 that are particularly suited for you.
Your sweet spot, right?
That you're most likely to be successful, all of those different things. And so those are the things that we do. We say, how do we make it easier for you to answer the questions like, what funding's available, which is usually the first step in sustainable infrastructure development. Where's the money? What should I do? Whether it's upgrading your home, the appliances in your home to be more energy efficient. Right now everyone's just like, oh, I guess I should get an EV charger. Should you get an EV charger? Small community that has 3 people in it? But no, probably not. But you don't know. Right. And so I think the core of it is, once refined, data from the perspective of decision support is perhaps the most exciting thing when it comes to this sustainability future, because sustainability is not going to look the same for every person, for every community, for every organization. It should have ultimately the same outcome, but the design will be dictated based on the customization for that stakeholder. Yeah. And so that for us has been the core area where we've been the most, it's been incredibly exciting. One community, poor, environmental justice area, designated disadvantaged community by the federal government, their transfer station, kind of like their garbage station, burned down. And then we're just thinking, oh, we got to, I guess, replace this. Where we're going to get the money? And so we helped them ingest all of their data, put it into the system. And one of the smart recommendations that spit out was turning that transfer station into a waste energy plant. Wow. That would not just be a kind of break even if they're lucky, but actually would be a profit generating center. They would have never even
thought of that,
or thought about it. Yeah. Concept. So, and that's when things get very, very exciting, because oftentimes people think that the smaller communities, the ones that aren't the big New Yorks, Chicago's, that they're not interested in innovation, that they're not interested in new ideas. That could not be farther from the truth. They just don't know. Right. They don't know what they don't know, and they don't have 100 people on their payroll to figure it out for them.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Well, I have to say, I've been very inspired by our conversation. I hope you all have as well. So please join me in thanking Jessica for joining us today.